Well, hello, 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 all you lovely people. Professor Gray here with the beginning of the end. That is right. We are in the sixth and final unit of the class. Wowie, we're almost done. And now I know what you're all thinking. Yes, I did get my hair cut. Or rather, my dad, who is visiting, he likes Buffalo, by the way. My dad is visiting, and he took a pair of clippers and cut off my mullet for me. I'm very happy about that, though it still looks ridiculous. But hey, having a lot of fun here. Anyway, while we were almost done with this unit, that's far more important than my hair. Yes, we're on the final unit of the class. I know it's been quite the march. I have no doubt you guys are just pushed through. Not much left, thank heavens. So we're in the final unit of the class, number 6. We're looking at morality beyond universal rules and principles. Now, the idea motivating this final unit of the class is the idea that the ethics sometimes, especially at this point, might seem kind of dry and impersonal because we've been seeing a lot, again, we've been focusing a lot on normative ethics. Recall that normative ethics has us state and defend our basic moral principles. And so far, the concern might be is that our basic moral principles that we've seen, so far in this course, in some ways might seem kind of divorced from or separate from your and my everyday lived experience, because we're seeing rules here, for instance, that are supposed to be impartial and universal, applying to everyone, everywhere, treating everyone the exact same way. And this does not seem to be reflective of a lot of what goes on in our everyday lives when focusing on our particular relationships or particular obligations or particular situations we find ourselves in. Because instead we're told that morality involves adherence to general rules and principles, like, say, the principle of, utility from utilitarianism, right? The principle of utility just says, produce the greatest good for the greatest number. And then in Immanuel Kant, we saw a couple, of his formulae, a couple of his formulae. There was the formula of universal law, right? That said, to only act, what did he say? Act only on that maxim that you could will to become a universal law. Or we had Kant's formula of humanity, which said, of course, to treat others as ends, never merely as means alone. And, in this standard approach, it seems kind of dry and impersonal and lacking kind of the touch of the particularities that we might find ourselves in. And so what we're going to look at in this module is some more recent approaches, because, look, the standard approach to ethics that we've seen for hundreds of years has largely been shaped by men. Because it's only been relatively recently, which is kind of sad, but there it is that relatively recently only have women been allowed to have an education or to earn a PhD and, to actually become professors and researchers and influence various fields of study, including philosophy. And so this is, especially amongst female philosophers, this has led to some speculation that perhaps in the study of ethics, there is something missing from this picture of ethics that involves, reflects their lives and their experiences. And that is something that might be valuable and important for ethics to consider. Again, the worry is that this abstract notion of morality fails to capture certain, things that might be quite important for moral decision making. And this has led to the idea that there might be something like a female ethics, a female ethic, a feminine ethic, something along these lines. And this is often known as an ethics of care. And so what's going on here? Now, an ethics of care holds that morality should emphasize 3 things. 1, maintaining personal relationships. 2, kindness and beneficence. And 3, sensitivity to one's own needs and the special needs of others. I'll just repeat this again. Ethics of care seems to be concerned with 3 types of things that need to be emphasized. 1, maintaining personal relationships. 2, kindness and beneficence. And 3, sensitivity to one's own needs and the special needs of others. And now in this module, we'll consider, I think, 2 pretty important questions when it comes to the ethics of care. The first question is simply, well, what does an ethics of care actually involve? I've given you kind of an outline there. And the second question is whether this ethics of care should be considered a special kind of female or feminine. Why am I doing this? A female or a feminine ethics. Again, so the two kind of questions I want to think about is, well, what does an ethics of care actually involve? And should this be thought of as something that's feminine or female? And we'll talk about both of these. Now, regarding the first question, what does an ethics of care actually involve? The reading from James Rachel's and Stuart Rachel's gives us a good sense of this, if you look into that. And I'll just kind of give some broad overview strokes of what that looks like, because I think you can get the sense of this pretty quickly about what's going on in an ethics of care. Because I mentioned, just now that the first thing that an ethics of care involves is this emphasis on maintaining our personal relationships, and very valuable, these personal relationships which we have with, our friends and family and others that we care about. And so, for instance, an ethics of care would say that you should care about your friends and family out of love or concern, right? Ethics of care, you care about, not just a fancy name. Your friends and family, you should act out of love and out of concern for them. And I hope this seems obvious to you all. Otherwise, I'm really sorry. I'll be your friend. That would be weird. Anyway. Because recall, Immanuel Kant, who we just got through with, right, thought that feelings were worthless. Feelings were expressions of desire and inclination, and that was all subjective, applying to one person but not another. And so, again, Kant believes we have to be, thinking universally as rational agents and acting out of duty, not out of desire and inclination. And so, yeah, we might agree that you have duties and obligations to your friends and family, but I think we also think, yeah, but love and concern is an essential part of that. That's what makes these relationships meaningful. It's not the duty to do it, but the actual expression of love and caring. And so Kantian ethics, by saying that love and caring is worthless, that's not the important part. By the way, I should just be clear, I mentioned this back with Kant, is that he thinks it's okay to love other people, but it just has no moral value. Cool. Yeah, so ethics of care says, well, Kant, you're missing out on something, buddy boy. Yes, maybe it's our duty, but loving and caring seems to be an essential part of that duty. And meanwhile, we've also seen the utilitarianism of, again, Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, and Peter Singer, and their emphasis, on happiness was this impartiality. No one person is more special than any other person. All that matters is happiness and suffering of people, but it doesn't matter whether or not you have a special relationship with those people or not, right? It's just, again, we're supposed to be impartial. No one's supposed to be biased or prejudiced against. But ethics of care doesn't like that impartiality, right? It thinks that, no, the people you love, the people you care for, you have special obligations to them on virtue of that. Heck, even through this bloody screen, which I don't get to see you, it would say I have some obligation to you guys because you are my students. And I do, though it's hard to show, I do care, even though I can't really show it in the way that I could in a classroom. That's why I mark up your exams probably more than you probably like, and more than anyone should. But I want to show I care. I'm reading your exams. I take what you're doing. You're doing very seriously. And so again, ethics of care is saying, look, we shouldn't be impartial. We do have special obligations to certain people and that we have relationships with. And so again, ethics of care emphasizing these one-on-one interactions we have with people, and we should attend to the special needs then of those people that we're interacting with. Remember, that's another big part of ethics of care. It's about emphasizing relationships and attending to the special needs of others, along with, of course, kindness and beneficence, these core ideas to ethics of care. But then they also say, ethics of care does say, is then we don't really have to worry as much about people suffering across the planet because we don't have that one-on-one special relationship with them. I need to care about your suffering, not the suffering of strangers halfway across the globe. And heck, if you looked at the reading, there is a whole thing about animals, right? That maybe, if you have pets, you probably, I hope, have feelings and special relationship with those pets that you care about. And so, yes, you should love and care for your pets. You have a special obligation to them as their caretakers. But again, ethics of care might say, but you don't have the same responsibilities to the animals you eat. They're not your pets. They're not your friends. And so you don't have that special relationship with them. So it's okay to eat animals. Now, I will just say we might already start to see a problem here with ethics of care that I'm going to highlight right away, and then you can just file it away and think about it. Because the problem here with ethics of care, as I've described it so far, is it might already sound a little bit like ethical egoism. Ethical egoism, the concern again with your own self-interest, with prudence, not altruism. And you may be saying, whoa, Professor Gray, come on, how is this ethical egoism? This is about caring for your friends and family. How could that doesn't sound like egoism, and that's true. Ethics of care is not the pure ethical egoism that we might have saw in Ayn Rand say. But look, it seems kind of close, and here's why. It's because you're only caring, with the ethics of care, you're only caring about a very small part of the world. The part of these particular people that you have a relationship with. Again, you only care about the part of the world that you have a special relationship with. Again, and that's because they are connected to you. And so at bottom, it's still about you. And so, yes, it's not the same as ethical egoism, but it starts to seem awfully close because you care about these people because you care about them, I guess. And it's like, wait a minute. And yeah, you don't have to care about anyone who is outside of your bubble. And this is where some people get a little nervous. They think, well, look, shouldn't you care about the guest? Shouldn't you care about the stranger? Shouldn't you care about the sufferings on some level of people you haven't met? I mean, the stranger, the guest, the person across the planet, it seems like their interests should matter, even if it's just in some way. It doesn't have to be everything. Like, say, Peter Singer, obviously very strict. But it seems like the people are suffering somewhere. That seems to at least matter in some sense. And so perhaps we do need a morality that includes some kind of notion of impartiality and other abstract principles. But again, it can include notions that do care about our personal relationships, and that those personal relationships also matter morally. I'll come back to that in the last video about thinking about how to integrate this ethics of care with what we've seen before. But anyway, so the first problem again with ethics of care is that it's starting to seem like this bias and partiality to those you care about looks a little like, seems kind of close to ethical egoism. And we've seen problems with that. Review the tapes. And so now the second problem that we might be seeing with ethics of care, that might be related to the first problem, is that this is a very underdeveloped theory. I mean, that is, it does a great job of pointing out about that morality about our personal relationships should matter. And I think that's something we haven't seen too much of in this semester, in this course. And so it's good that we're finally seeing that. But after that, the ethics of care just doesn't seem to be clear on how to integrate, again, those other concerns of impartiality and principle. Because those, things, impartiality, universality, rules and principles, they seem to be important too. And so this underdeveloped just doesn't seem to integrate these much together. I'll come back again to that at the end, but I just want to point that out from the get-go. There is a certain lack of development here. But look, hey, this idea of ethics of care is only like 50 years old tops, where it's been really sustained and developed. Whereas, of course, the moral theories we've been talking about in this class have been much older than that. So, of course, it's going to be underdeveloped. And there's a second reason I think that this might be underdeveloped, is because a lot of the debate has been less about what ethics of care is about and more on this issue about whether or not this is a female or feminine form of ethics. Recall, that is the second kind of major question I want to talk about in this module is, should ethics of care be considered a female or feminine form of ethics? And I think that is where the feminists really debate about this. Not all feminists agree, as we'll see. And I think there's been a lot of debate about that. And because that is such a as we'll see, it's not an easy debate. I think a lot of the development of the theory, hasn't really happened because there's a lot more question about, is this an ethics of women? Is this a female ethic? Is this a feminine ethic? All three of those could be different, by the way. If you studied, you might know that. But I won't go too deep into that. But that question, is the ethics of care a female ethic? That's the kind of question I want to think about for the rest of this module. Though I think by discussing this, we will naturally shed more light on what actually is going on with the ethics of care itself and how that ethics of care is different from the normative theories we've talked about. So, like utilitarianism and Kantian deontology. So first in this module, I want to talk about how the notions of ethics of care arose in some psychological studies done on young boys and young girls. And this will interpret, people that there are perhaps two moral perspectives based on gender going on here. And this idea that there being two perspectives is quite popular with some feminists. However, second, I'll present the argument from Jean Grimshaw, which offers the feminist critique of ethics of care. Now, because Grimshaw is not a fan of there being some sort of female ethics. But hey, she's also a feminist, and so she thinks there could be some good going on in in ethics of care. It's just calling that a feminine or female ethic. She thinks that is very problematic. And finally, I'll wrap up this module by talking about the value of an ethics of care and how we might appreciate it without having to take a stand on whether or not this ethics of care is female or feminine. So there it is. There's the module on ethics of care. But before we continue into all that, you know what I like to do first. Let's take a quick break and we'll come back here and we'll get started.